Okay, so as we sit here and record this direct, it's just been a few hours since the early access for the campaign of the latest Modern Warfare game was unlocked. And yeah, obviously we've got coverage planned for the consoles, but John, you've been looking at it on PC. And well, I think it's fair to say that you're not the world's biggest Call of Duty fan, but you're quite happy with what you're seeing here, right?
Well, so I kind of view Call of Duty like this, especially the campaign, is it's kind of like one of those action movies you go see where you kind of turn
Right.
off your brain a little bit and you're just there for the spectacle. Because Call of Duty always brings the spectacle, and this year is obviously no different. I do actually like these campaigns. Like they are simple. I don't replay them or anything, but it's a fun little it's a roller coaster ride, and it always showcases awesome visuals. And I've become increasingly grateful for them continuing to create these high budget campaigns, given that we have a lot of other studios that are focused completely on multiplayer, and they would never do something like this anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's cool that this still exists. And this year they have made some interesting changes. First of all, the opening mission, not to spoil what happens there, there's some pretty surprising and cool reveals in there, I would say, story-wise, which I liked. It's probably the best, like, intro, Call of Duty intro mission I've seen in a long time. Like, it's actually pretty awesome. And it looks fantastic. Like, the character rendering especially. So, actually, before we get into the looks, I should talk about playing on the PC. Obviously, high-end PC here, 4090, still 12900K. I just went max settings across the board because why not? DLAA is used, and I actually tried it with frame gen because I was getting it was in the up around 100 frames per second without frame gen, but with frame gen, you just get that 100 and you get the exact match for your monitor. And it's, first of all, frame gen is at this point where you just show this to anybody and you say, like, how does this look and feel? I guarantee most people would not be able to guess that you're using frame generation at this point. It just looks perfectly native, especially with DLAA enabled. I mean, image quality is sublime. It's very, very crisp. Lots of options to edit as usual, including that interesting thing where they allow you to toggle between weapon motion blur only, or you can also turn on world motion blur, which I think is a really smart thing that Call of Duty has continued to do, where if you want full per object motion blur and everything, you can get it. But if you just want like the cool looking cinematic blur on your first person weapon, you can also have that, which is great because not everybody wants full screen blur. But yeah, so first mission opens up, great visual quality, character rendering top notch. Like everything about it looks great. And then you get to the second mission, and this is kind of interesting because this is where they open up with the, I guess, like open zone mission. I actually forget specifically what they call it, but you kind of get blown up in a cutscene and then you start with your knife, and it's pretty much like what if Warzone kind of map was integrated into single player? And I actually don't know enough about the Warzone map to say if this is the Warzone map, but it does actually like let you run free. You have objectives. There's this big map. You have to initially scramble to get some weapons, and then you're making your way to these different areas. And it seems much more open-ended than usual, in a way that I thought was interesting. And I actually like the idea of using aspects of Warzone in the campaign. And that's kind of what they're doing this time. I think they experimented with some stuff back in like the Black Ops 2 days, but that was not really, it was still small maps. It was just like letting you choose what you did on the side. But this is like actually a large open map.
Yeah, I think we're on the IW9 engine now, and I think that the
Yeah.
thing people need to understand is that it is the Warzone engine is the campaign engine, right? There's complete
Yes.
unification across the board between campaign, multiplayer, and Warzone. So there's no reason why you can't have these more open-ended missions because the systems are identical. I guess
Exactly.
it's just a case that with the campaign they can do something that's a bit more sculpted to that specific experience, which for me has always been the really interesting thing about the Call of Duty campaigns is that, well, obviously for multiplayer they need to accommodate a wider range of systems, and the level of ambition has to be lower. But when you've got the campaign, which is more tightly funneled, you can just throw the kitchen sink at the player in terms of engine features and stuff. But it's really interesting to see stuff that they developed for a completely different project to all intents and purposes, rolled back into the campaign to produce something that we haven't really seen before. I mean, there have been big maps in Call of Duty right up to Vanguard and Modern Warfare 2, but this is different, right?
The big difference here is that even though it is still scripted and driven by a story, you're no longer constrained down what I would say is the Call of Duty tunnel, right? Because a lot of those missions are designed where you're running forward, there's always an objective in front of you, and you're basically hiding behind stuff, shooting dudes from windows and like along this path, and you're just moving along this path. With the open map here now, it's like, all right, your objective's over here. There's actually multiple ways to get there, and you're no longer just limited to shooting at the enemies from whatever predefined spot the map has to offer. You can actually flank them, go around. You can use different tools to get there. You can come from above. It actually feels more... It's almost like if you give it a little bit of Halo inspiration in a way. Because in Halo, right, it's still linear, but you had a lot more freedom in terms of how you approach your enemies. You're always on the move. You're not just hiding behind boxes. And this is still not as like energetic as Halo in that way, which Halo was all about commanding the battlefield, lots of melee attacks. This isn't quite that yet, but it definitely veers a little bit more in that direction in a way that I thought was kind of compelling. I'm actually curious to see where it goes. I do have one complaint though. When it got to the open map zone, I noticed right away the textures on things started to look bad on like objects and items. So I dipped into the options menu, and there's this thing again where it's like streaming textures, where it indicates that it downloads textures from the internet while you play.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that wasn't working correctly for me, because like the world textures looked okay, but like all like the smaller objects and details and like even the weapons and like your characters like bandana were like quite low res, and there didn't seem to be any way to just force that to load. So I don't know. I need to explore that more, because aside from that, the actual like technical performance was really good. It does the pre-compilation step at the menu as it's done for a long time. And you just get into the game and there's no stuttering, no hitching, no weirdness. It just rolls smoothly at a high frame rate. It's just this one issue with the texture loading that I thought was odd. So,
yeah, I was pretty sure that the streaming texture option was basically for all the MTX skins for multiplayer.
So
I might be
maybe
wrong
it's
there.
not that then. But either way, like the texture quality, if it's not that, then something else is going on, because I pushed it up to the max in terms of texture quality. And it just, a lot of the smaller objects just look really low res. Maybe it's a side effect of the move into the open map kind of design. I'm not sure
possibly,
yet.
or it could just be an early bug.
It could be a bug as well.
Still in the early access period, I understand. So possibly.
That's true. That's true.
Oliver,
So
Oliver, what's your take on this on Call of Duty? Because obviously this week there's been a lot of bad news coming from Bungie about layoffs at the studio, issues with Destiny 2. There's statements coming from management about how they've let down the players and whatnot. And yet every year we have a completely different approach from Activision with Call of Duty. You get a new game without fail, which kind of, I think, always gives you the sense of a new level, a jumping on point, so to speak. And there's always this new campaign. And I'm kind of surprised, bearing in mind that Modern Warfare and Call of Duty are quintessentially viewed as multiplayer games, that we get these campaigns every year without fail, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting difference in model, because like with Bungie, I think one of the problems that you have there is you have a game that's out for 6 years, right? And that's a game that people build on, and there's so much content for it, and they end up deleting some content as well. But it's a hard game to get into, and there's so many complicated systems and things like this. Whereas even though Call of Duty is a much simpler game, I think, on a systems level, they're still releasing a new game every year, and that gives people a really easy jumping in point, right? With these new titles. And there's so much content in them, and obviously to do that you need to have a staff of maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people. But it's it's a very, I think, compelling model if you can staff that up and actually get out a new game every year with brand new content, something to please everyone. Like, I'm not a huge fan of multiplayer Call of Duty, but I do enjoy the campaigns. So you get a really good experience regardless of what you like.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we're going to be taking a look at the console versions in due course, and it's great that you managed to get a good look at the PC version. But there are no ray tracing features, right, John?
No, the whole, as you pointed out, I saw a thing on Twitter where it was like, oh, RTX on, like a sponsored ad thing for this. I was like, wait a minute, that they don't usually trot that out unless there's ray tracing. But alas, as you pointed out, they now use that to describe things like frame generation and DLSS now. So yeah, it does not have any ray tracing features yet, unfortunately, which is a real shame because screen space reflections are used all over the place, and actually having proper RT reflections would be nice because, when you're looking up and down, those screen space reflections, they just come and go. It doesn't look great. I'm not a fan of that. So, but clearly, I mean, consoles are obviously the target, a big target for these games, right? And they need to be able to hit those high frame rates still. So, they did that actually at launch with Cold War, though. That had ray trace shadows, and they looked great.
Actually, it brings us on to this question from Nicholas King. Can you guys please find out why Activision has seemingly given up on RT effects for the COD series? Black Ops Cold War was the last title to have it, if I recall correctly. Yeah. And I think you do recall correctly. I think, Cold War is obviously a Treyarch game, right? And it's quite interesting to note that while there is technical commonalities between engines, the Treyarch Call of Duty engine is actually quite separate and distinct from the IW9 engine, which is used basically by all of the other Call of Duty studios. I'm kind of a bit mystified as to why there is still this division at this point, but there it is. And they incorporated ray-traced shadows into Cold War. But the focus of the Infinity Ward tech team is essentially in pushing the envelope, pushing what you can get into 16.7 milliseconds of rendering time every year, doing new things. But they also need to service a still massive PlayStation 4 audience. So I guess it's just basically, the fact that they're trying to push these systems in a way that is scalable between generations still. And a good example of this, I guess, is the shadows. You had RT shadows in Black Ops Cold War, but in Vanguard and I think probably the latest ones as well, Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3. I haven't looked at Modern Warfare 3, but they have two separate shadow systems. They have a simplified one for the older systems, but then they have one that kind of gives you most of the bang for the buck that you'd get from RT shadows in terms of the varying penumbra and sharpness of the shadow, and it is just for the next gen systems and PC. But I'm assuming they went for that simply for speed. It probably was faster than RT shadows. But I'm hoping that they, at some point there is going to come a time where it just makes sense to target the more modern systems, and maybe we'll see something there.
Gosh, I just looking this up and I realized there's actually an Xbox One version.
Right. Yeah, I think we need to take a look at those. I mean, it is fascinating always. I mean, Modern Warfare 2 was fascinating.
I'm looking at footage of it running on a PS4 here, the campaign, and it still looks freaking great. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting that they've continued to support those older platforms. I'm actually surprised that they haven't moved away from, say, campaign is now only on next gen or current gen.
Yeah.
Which they did do before. Treyarch did that with Black Ops 3, I think. There was a PS360 version of that game, but it was multiplayer only.
Yeah, I think that was in the time where the cross-gen was basically two separate projects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they've done it again. There's a new Call of Duty, and I have no idea. Well, I do have some idea of the logistics involved because I met the Infinity Ward guys a couple of times. But when you're talking about thousands of contributors, that is basically it. And that's why you've got all of these satellite studios that are just servicing Call of Duty. Really interesting stuff, just the scale of that project and the fact that, everybody sort of, when a kind of less impressive series entry comes out like Vanguard, which I still think was quite an impressive game, good campaign, people are calling for maybe they should skip a year. they just can't. The burn rate on investment into each Call of Duty game is such that, you know, the levels of money we're talking about in just making the game is just vast. It defies comprehension.
Is this the biggest, most expensive first party studio game in existence now?
I'm not sure.
It might be.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, those games just come out without fail. It's quite phenomenal to see it. But yeah, I don't really know what more we can add to Modern Warfare at the moment, because it's literally just quote unquote dropped. But yeah, we'll obviously have more content on it soon.
Why, hello there, John from Friday. This is John from Sunday. I wanted to pop in here real quick because you were talking pretty excitedly about that campaign. I heard you earlier. Problem is, by the time you recorded that on Friday, you'd only played the first 3 missions, and there was a lot of expectations based on the way these things normally go. Now I sit here having played much more of the campaign, which, by the way, is not very long, it turns out, and I feel I wanted to chime in here because I may not get another chance to talk about it. Basically, it's disappointing. And the reason is that did not manage to fulfill the promise that was initially sort of presented. Where the idea, when I first started to play it, you know, you had this bombastic introduction that's really well handled, bringing back a familiar villain. That kind of got me excited. And then I like this idea of open missions. I think that's a really smart idea and something that could have been done really well in this series. Because frankly, you know, I like the cinematic stuff, but I kind of hoped that they'd moved away a little bit and offer some more variety. And I was kind of hoping for something more like Halo-ish style level design, or even, I don't know, like taking over bases in Far Cry, which, you know, actually not bad. Unfortunately, the problem here is that all the open zone missions, which make up like more than half of the game now, there's actually like maybe an hour's worth of the more traditional Call of Duty stuff in here. The open zone missions, they're basically like they just rip maps out of Warzone in the end, it turns out. And it feels like a multiplayer thing against bots. It doesn't have that carefully curated cinematic moments anymore. Basically, you drop into the map, here's some dots, places you can go, you go there, you're just being talked to over the radio, and like the way it plays out doesn't feel that special. The way weapons are just placed all over the battlefield is exactly like a multiplayer game. I don't think the AI is good enough to support multiple play styles. Like the stealth side of things doesn't work very well. That's something, for instance, Far Cry does much better, I would argue. So, I mean, the core gunplay still feels good, but the freedom you get from being able to play in these larger maps, it's not really there, I would say. It's a bummer. And yeah, so seeing more of that and the way that they don't really tie the story up very well, it feels a little bit scattershot, even though it had a lot of potential. I think it's, unfortunately, it's not nearly as good as, I would say the Modern Warfare 2019 campaign was really enjoyable. I did enjoy Modern Warfare 2, except for the overhead, the gunship missions. I never liked those. Cold War was also quite good, but that's a Treyarch joint. This one, though, I can see what they wanted to achieve to some degree, but you can tell this was never going to be like a full-blown, like the real deal kind of campaign. And then, so with that, I kind of look at what they're doing here, and earlier in the direct, I was like, hey, it's cool they're still doing these types of campaigns despite multiplayer being the thing, but now that I've seen this through, it's like maybe they are starting to back down a little bit from this quality, and I hope that this does not represent what we get going forward from the series, you know. But again, those yearly schedules are tough, so but yeah, this is, if you're just in it for the campaign, and I'm someone that did enjoy playing these for the campaign, I know there's maybe like dozens of us at this point, don't do it. That's basically it.